Well, co-hosting, I assume, so that Anne can still make herself heard or not? Do we do one at a time?
And what about Claude's slides?
Yeah.
So as long as I'm a co-host, that allows me to show my slides, and we already tested that out. So that's
Oh,
all
good.
good.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
So it's
I thought about that and I figured, well, you knew technology as well as I do. Okay, so it's 4:02. We'll start the meeting. And we'll start with the minutes from the last meeting. And are there any other comments other than the ones that Ruth sent with edits?
I would move approval of the minutes.
Wait. Sorry. Just let's get. Just want to have a little discussion. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with those edits because
I just interrupt and say,
Yep.
You need to do a roll call vote to.
Oh, you're right.
start the meeting.
Okay.
Who's here? I'm here. Anne Rarick is here.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Paul.
Claude.
Hey, man. We saw Bruce a minute ago. Where
I see-
are we?
I see his username down at the bottom here.
Yeah, I see his username, but he's muted.
Mhm.
Well, Bruce, we have to have you unmute and say your name. Say you're here. Well,
Well, we have a quorum.
we have a quorum.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
He'll join us when he joins us. All right, Claude, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thanks. So in terms of it, I'm obviously comfortable if we want to vote to change the minutes, but I'd rather change the vote for accuracy as opposed to taking out things that may or may not seem to be relevant. And because to my mind, everything that was said was relevant. And also I took a look at Mary Icardi's bio, and it's remarkably impressive. I mean, past chair of the Massachusetts Municipal Personnel Association, a human resources director, and one of the most impressive things was actually acted as a consultant to 50 municipalities to update their classification and compensation plans. I mean, given that we only have 300 municipalities, I mean, you really scored big in bringing a real, HR expert to the table. So I'd really hesitate in taking out anything she said unless we didn't say it accurately.
I think the concern here is that more attention was given to her than the task force.
Well, I wasn't thinking of it in those terms, and it's all very interesting, folks, but we can't really discuss this unless there's a motion on the table.
Yeah.
So please let me finish my motion, which would be to amend the minutes. If somebody else wants to go first and move the minutes, and then I can amend, either way is acceptable.
Go for it.
Okay. I'm hearing background noises, so
And we need a second, right?
yes, we
Second.
do.
And now we have discussion.
So I am proposing not that, I am proposing to amend the minutes, not because anything that was said was inaccurate, but that it didn't address the issue that we had invited Mary Akari to present. And I wanted to make sure that what we had reflected our topic, which was the survey.
And is your phone on? You're echoing. Thank you.
Is that Bruce?
That's better.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Say hi. So we know you're here. Okay. So if you would allow, I would like to step through the changes that I propose, or respond to questions that you have regarding my changes.
Go ahead.
Okay, under visitor discussion where we had Mary Akari, two lines up from the bottom.
There's still some echoing going on. Bruce, if you've got a phone and a computer on, you only need one. You're the echo, I think.
There's nothing going on here. Hang on.
Go
Okay.
ahead. Ruth.
All right. So in the paragraph 3 under visitor discussion, two lines up from the bottom, we have the word town employees and town employees duplicated. I propose that the first one becomes town stakeholders. Then I'm moving on to the next paragraph beginning Mary said, and I propose striking everything except the last sentence. So we would keep, she said that framing questions is very important. She said to really pin down the right timing. I'm sorry, that's the last two.
And
Yes,
I
ma'am.
would suggest that it be Mary made the framing of the questions rather than she.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not sure why we're taking these out because that's a very important statement by an expert. We may not have invited her to say that, but she cautioned about personnel boards being involved.
That's why we don't need it in there.
But wait, why? I don't know that that's the case. Minutes are meant to be accurate. We may not want to act on it, but it's accurate from what was said. So I don't understand why we're taking it out.
but
But
it
there's a
also
lot of
is,
things that were left out.
yeah,
Like
it's
what?
not a transcript. It does not attempt to be a transcript.
Okay,
I-
again, I'm uncomfortable because it seems to be we're taking out an awful lot of things that are perceived to be negative about the survey and negative about personnel boards. And she said those things. We may not agree with them, but she said them.
I've said a few things, Pat, in a meeting that were negative about some other things, and they're not included in the minutes. But I mean, I agree, this is not a transcript or a verbatim thing, and I get Ruth's point.
All right, moving on to the next paragraph that begins, Ruth asks how to get employee input. I suggest we strike the last sentence that begins, she said that I can't tell you how many. In the following paragraph, I propose striking the first sentence. Mary said more and more personnel boards are getting out of the grievance procedure. Could very well be true. The next sentence, I suggest striking the beginning phrase and starting instead with capital more and more employee issues. On page 2, I would go paragraph 4 discussion, the third paragraph. That's just me being fussy. Ruth and Ann ask whether the task force should contract. All of those together, I think, focus on what our purpose was and what we accomplished.
Yeah, okay, as the clerk, I'm extraordinarily uncomfortable with this because we're taking out things that were said at a public meeting that was recorded that are right on target with things that are important. We might not have asked her to come here to talk about those things, but you brought in an HR expert to talk about surveys, and the HR expert said, for example, I can't tell you how many personnel boards have trouble with grievances coming to them and how they're getting out of grievance issues. I mean, how is that not spot on our task? That's really relevant information.
Our task was discussing.
No, our
Survey.
task, the task force's task.
Survey.
No, you
we
brought
asked
her in. You brought her in clearly to discuss the survey. Our task is broader, and she happened to talk about things that are spot on. And if we don't memorialize it in the record, it's like it didn't happen, but it did happen.
I just make my proposal. I turn to the task force for their opinion.
So we need to vote on acceptance of the amended minutes, and then we'll vote on the submitted draft. So how many are for the amended minutes?
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
And then how many for the original submitted draft? We have one for the submitted draft and 4 for the amended ones.
Okay, I mean, the motion passes. I'm actually not comfortable signing those minutes, so I'll pass that along to Ruth if you'd like to sign those minutes.
Sure.
All right, have we got any updates from anybody? Yeah,
I have a question and an update. I did manage an interview with David Wood out of CMLP. It was a very fruitful interview. Probably should be going back around again. He had interesting information, which I will put on paper for you, but it left me with a question. Was I also assigned the fire chief? Somehow in the back of my head.
No, I wasn't. I haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, okay, good. It's your head.
All right. It's my bad.
Okay, thank you.
and then and Ruth, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce Aaron.
Yes, please. Wave, Aaron, so everybody sees you. Aaron Mulcahy has been employed by the town of Concord for a good many years. She knows us. She's active in the finance department, very, very able. She was my go-to person for several of our applications. She's also worked in the HR department, so she has picked up a lot of skills there. I think she will be very useful to us because she can keep our feet on the ground, keep our noses pointed in the right direction, and she can help us behave, which I think we are going to need. Erin, there you are. Welcome.
Here I am. Thank you very much for that, Ruth. I have to say, you were very generous with that introduction. Let's say that. I'm thrilled to help you meet your goals any way that I can. Feel free to reach out to me and I will help you do anything that I can do. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me.
And Ruth and I met with Aaron last Thursday, just to sort of bring her up to speed a little bit. And we will be having many meetings, I'm sure. And I want to thank everybody for bringing your draft questions to the table. And as we've pointed out at previous meetings, these are draft. And they will not be used as they are raw, as this is. We have had a conversation or two with the town manager about the goals of the questionnaire. And I think everybody CC'd on the town manager's email of Sunday?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think her points were well taken in terms of there are some things that go too far beyond the scope of our particular charge. So as we put them into a format that can be used in a survey, we will be changing them. Obviously, there's one question that seems to already be on everybody's questions, which is, have you heard of the personnel board? And there are many others that look like they're an overlap that we will be bringing back to the next meeting for your review and continued massaging, if you will. And then Aaron is going to be involved in some of the logistics involved, which have to do with how we come up with a final list. One of the questions that we have to figure out is exactly the timing, because one of the things that Carrie, glad you're on here, you brought up was something about timing with union negotiations.
Sure, Anne, did you want me to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay, so with respect to some of the survey questions asked some specific, or there were some suggestions of specific questions related to maybe types of benefits or things that are subject to or are mandatory subjects of bargaining. So
which are not in our purview, and we're going to take them out.
right, and so just if you were to send this survey out to all employees, or if all employees had access to it, I guess what I would say is that maybe there be some sort of introduction that talks about the purpose, and you want to be sure to make sure that you're not interfering in any way unintentionally with a required bargaining process.
Great.
And do you and, I'm sorry to interrupt, you and or Aaron know enough about the underpinnings of SurveyMonkey, which is the only vehicle we've talked about right to this point? Could we have access to some chit chat space before we ask the first question? Because I sounds like a good idea, Carrie, but I don't know if we're allowed to.
We can set up a context for the survey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, there was somebody's hand up. Yeah, Susan, yes.
Susan.
I had a question about the questions. I thought that they were all being developed by the task force, but I saw in the packet that you're also accepting questions from citizens.
Well, I checked with the planning board, and I thought it would be good for them if they wanted to submit some ample questions to be able to do so. And
When she
anybody else,
says planning board, she means personnel board.
Right, but these are
Oh.
citizens that aren't on any boards.
True.
okay.
No, the people.
So what's the question?
The question is, I thought that I understood that the task force with, input from boards and committees and town officials would develop, but the questions that I saw submitted in the packet had the names of people on it that aren't on any boards or committees, but.
Well, one was a
No, my
past,
follow-up is, if they were allowed, I mean, shouldn't any citizen be allowed to do
sure,
that?
this is an open meeting.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
I think it's a great idea. Just let us know, give us your questions.
Well, I was just wondering why certain people somehow
Well,
got the inside track on in giving questions, but you hadn't in an open meeting said anyone is welcome to
No,
do so.
We had
But there
not.
were people who assumed that they could.
Well, they've been paying attention. They have been.
They've been at the
zooming with
meetings.
us.
But they got permission from, somehow they got a message that they could participate in this
They're at
part
the
of it.
meeting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyone can.
Okay. So,
So
Okay,
yeah,
thank
I
you.
would say in the next 2 weeks, Susan, if anybody has any questions they would like to have considered, we would be glad to entertain them. Does not guarantee that they're going to end up in the survey.
Thank you for the clarification.
I have the feeling we cut off Carrie.
No, I'm not sure I had anything further to say just on that specific topic, but I'd be happy to talk more about the questions if that's, or when that's appropriate.
Okay, so we're good. So we thought that we would talk about the context of the survey and the logistics of the survey before we got to the actual questions. And I figure logistics has Erin's name all over it.
And the context has our name on it. And I think we started to do is we started to talk about the scope, and I see this survey as really kind of honing in on engagement of employees in the town and how they engage with the town manager, the personnel board, and the town meeting. And I think Claude has set that up very nicely with his presentation. Do any of you have any other thoughts, comments, input? Yes, Paul.
Under logistics, I guess a question for Carrie's as well as a group is, how are we handling the town side? That's what I call it, of if you're still wanting to partner with us in a survey, how do we handle the town side and our side? Is that a process we do through Erin? And a follow-up to that, or further to that, if we get questions that seem to be questionable outside of our scope, would you like us to forward them to you as possible input for questions that you might want to ask?
Yeah.
That are outside.
So the more I've been thinking about the survey, the more I've realized how difficult it would be to put two surveys together, for you to ask your questions and for me to ask my questions. And so I think and your timetable may be more immediate than mine, unfortunately, with everything that's going on. So I think the best course of action is for you to move forward with your survey. And it would be very, very helpful if you are hearing concerns or people are submitting questions that you think are more things that I should be asking. If you would pass those along, that would be very helpful. So I guess in terms of logistics, Erin, as the staff liaison, is here to help you compile and distribute a survey. And I think there are easy enough ways that we make sure it gets to the right group of employees and not particularly not to unionized employees where you may run into a little bit of trouble.
But wait a minute. If, for instance, we removed the questions having to do with unionized employees, then would not all employees receive the survey, which was our goal? But Anne uses very nice words about engagement as being the context to determine the engagement of employees. I'm taking a step further back and saying I would like the same sorts of information that we are asking of all of our town stakeholders to date. We set common questions and we listen. And I'd like to set common questions for the employees and listen till we get a snapshot, is my favorite word, a snapshot of where we are.
So the question is, if we take the questions about unions out, does it become available? Can we make it available to everybody?
So I think there is a certain set of questions within the scope of the Personnel Study Task Force that can be asked of all employees. It's not just the questions, removing the questions related to unionized employees. There are some other questions that I think are probably beyond the scope that would be best asked by me in a separate survey.
Yeah, okay.
Could we have some examples of that?
Sure.
So
So
they were in the email.
right, I didn't, I mean,
One of
I'm
them had-
happy,
Yeah, one of them I think has to do with sick leave, flexible, flex time, that kind of thing. I think it was
So
more
we're-
a sick bank.
right,
So
so I think,
those,
okay, sorry.
my question has to do with, if I follow on with Anne, those things that you say are beyond the scope are not within the scope of the personnel board either? Is that why they're beyond our scope?
So the scope. Right, I get the personnel board does not get into specific benefits. They don't get into health insurance and what health insurance we offer and what percent contribution the town pays. So there were a lot of questions, and I fully understand that health insurance is a big issue for our employees and something that people would like to see change, but the personnel board would also not be the board responsible for talking about health insurance offerings and the cost of health insurance and whether or not that's comparable to what other communities are offering. There were some, oh, sorry.
I mean, when you're done, pardon me, when you're done, Carrie, I just had a quick observation.
Sure. There were some questions that I sort of lumped in as career goals where you've asked about do employees see themselves as working for the town for the rest of their career? Questions like that, that I think that information it's very interesting. I think it might be helpful to know, but I think it's hard to interpret that. We have so many different generations of employees working now. And, depending on which generation you are from, it might not be a negative thing to say, I don't see myself working here for the rest of my career. But
Yeah.
that might be received as being negative by somebody from a different generation. So I think those questions are hard. And the employee satisfaction questions, again, a lot of information that we need to hear. We need to understand what the issues are, but really feel like they're beyond the scope of this group and the personnel board.
Yeah.
So if we focus on compensation plan, that's personnel board. But retention recruitment is not. Is that the focus?
I would say for sure retention and recruitment is not a direct focus or duty of the personnel board. The compensation plan, so on an annual basis, the personnel board does vote on the compensation plan on the percent increase that is made available to employees, and then if we have a merit program that year on top of that. So that is something that the personnel board is involved in.
Paul, did you had your hand up?
Yes. I'm disappointed to hear that a combined survey doesn't seem to be on the table now. I think enough issues have been raised anecdotally and across the board where it's a good idea to do it. I think the employee input is very important in the workings of this town. Yes, we are working within the narrow confines of the personnel bylaws, and I get that. But I think enough issues have been raised where it would be a great benefit to have an employee survey combined together so that it's done in the same context of one could possibly be relating to another. So I guess I just want to say I'm disappointed that's changed. Because it was you and I, Carrie, that were the ones that were discussing this. And that sounded great. Because if something's not really, it's a good question, but it's not really zeroed in on the personnel board side of things, it's still a good question. And should be asked. And we have enough issue, and I'm disappointed. That's my point.
Sure. So I guess I want to make it clear that I'm not saying I'm not going to be asking these questions. I think the further I have gotten into this, I've realized the difficulty in trying to marry the two surveys.
Yeah. I'm hearing that you have a slightly different purpose. Bruce,
I'd like to echo Paul's concerns too. I think it's a huge mistake not to do a joint one, but that's just my opinion.
any other comments?
Not to beat a dead horse, but I did not hear Carrie say she wasn't going to. She was saying that it might not come together, that it's a match. She didn't say it is not a match.
Susan?
And I guess I'm saying, why not try? Why not try to have something be a match? And I'm not, I mean, I don't know about anybody else. I'm not anticipating a 400 question survey. I'm anticipating a very short yes or no survey. And if there's a couple of direct questions that seem to make people uncomfortable, well, there are issues that have been raised that are simple enough to put together. And I think at the same time, I felt really good about doing it at the same time so that the employees would see there's some recognition of issues, or they could possibly project their feelings on a yes or no question about a particular issue that's hot. And I'm not talking, everyone knows health insurance, and that's not, I get that. I did read the court case that the civil case that you cited in its entirety. It's pretty narrow, and I get it. I see that where a mandatory bargaining issue, we should stay away from if it's something that goes out to all employees. That particular case is very specific to sick time. And it was a result of Charlie Baker's wanting to cut down sick time with the state employees. So it's very specific, and I get it. And I see the bargainable things. Okay, we can stay away from that easily, but I don't know why you can't ask a question that's somewhat or very, very much related to the overall picture. That's my point.
Susan, and then Claude?
Yeah, thank you. I think everybody submitted, there are a lot of good questions, but the overriding question is whether they relate to the charge you've been given for this committee. Maybe there needs to be another committee that does the kind of stuff you're talking about, and with personnel surveys. I don't know, but it's not really in the charge for this committee. And the other thing I was reminded of what Mary said, there's a liability you assume with a survey. And if someone reports something to you, it might be serious, might not. If it ends up it's serious and you do nothing, there's a liability, not for you personally, but for the town.
Yeah.
So I just think you really need to
Tread
focus a
lightly.
little more about what you expect to achieve by the survey, and then the questions will follow from that.
Yeah.
And if it's just employee satisfaction, that's not in the list of allowed, or that's on the list of the very short list that Carrie said of things not to be asking about in this particular committee.
Right.
Not to say it can't happen in another venue, but it's not the charge. Thank you.
Claude?
Thanks. I'd agree with what Susan said and what Carrie said in her email over the weekend. We have a very specific charge, and our questions, it would seem, should relate to that. But I also like what Carrie said in the meeting, that if we happen to identify questions as a result of our discussions that we think it would be helpful to have answered, we certainly can forward those to Carrie, for her to ask. And, that's obviously her purview.
Right.
The personnel board has a mission, the town manager has a mission, and we also have a very specific mission.
Thank you. Carrie,
So one additional thing that I would add, I guess, in response to the disappointment about not combining the surveys is you are a public body. You are subject to public records and open meetings law. And so there may be questions that I want to ask in my survey that to get a response from employees, they may not be willing to provide the same information if they know this is going to be a public document. And I will use the example of the DEI study that was done recently. And this is a little bit of a sore subject where certain members of certain town employees were interviewed and a report was prepared. And then there was a public records request for that report. And I can tell you as an employee that was interviewed, I may have answered differently or not as freely if I knew that this document was going to be a public document. And I think that's some of the concern. I recognize that there are issues that people want addressed. And I'm very much interested in knowing those issues and doing what I can to address them. And I think that the questions that you provided really get at a lot of what I'm hearing as well. I think it's just difficult to expect employees to participate in a survey that's talking about employee satisfaction, benefits, and effectiveness of management, and knowing that may become part of a public record that anybody can request a copy of. And so that's sort of my thought process over time, that I think a survey is great. It would be wonderful if we could just do one combined effort. But as time goes on, I'm seeing the pitfalls of doing that.
go ahead, Paul.
I think you did mention to me, Carrie, that you hadn't watched our meetings. I have the sense that we pretty much nailed it down, or in the beginning, that these would be yes or no questions. And this would be an anonymous survey. So I'm not following the pitfalls or falling into traps that I was a full, it'll be at a recorded meeting, advocate of it being a public record, that the survey become a public record in its entirety. And I don't know how a yes or no question gets you in any hot water. Do you agree
Sure,
with
so
this? Yes or no?
I'm not sure I would limit a survey I did to yes or no questions. I don't think yes or no responses are going to help me understand all of the issues.
Okay, I'm just stating where I'm at.
All right, we move on. So, Claude, you're up.
No, wait, what about the questions?
Oh,
Are
well,
we
you
starting?
and I are going to come back at the next meeting with a proposed list for the whole committee to review.
So our job would be limited to removing redundancies.
Removing
I-
redundancies, merging questions that are the same, making sure that they're in the scope of the task force, framed in a way that invites a response, etc. And
Okay.
we'll talk with Erin about it.
Because I don't feel comfortable usurping the discussion of the entire committee. So once
No,
we get
they're gonna see a combined version of it.
okay. So that will be on our agenda in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Sorry, Claude. Did you
And we'll
interrupt?
take, and to Susan's point, we'll take other questions as they come between now and then.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks for the
Okay,
clarification.
should I start?
Yeah.
Yes, please. I'm
Okay.
sorry to you
No,
said
not-
it
Not
First
at
of
all.
all, first of all, thank you for getting them down to 11.
anyway.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's still 11, but you'll get it. Let me just maximize this. Okay, so can everyone see the slides that say draft?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm starting with this slide I just added because I thought it would be helpful to give some background of what the governance is that regards personnel. The town charter actually requires a personnel board. The personnel bylaw, that obviously establishes the system that involves the personnel board, the town manager, and in some instances, town meeting. It also establishes that the personnel board and town manager develop personnel policies and procedures. There's then the personnel charge. This is actually perhaps the most out-of-date document. It was really at the launch of the personnel board at the time in 1985, and unless I'm missing a document somewhere, it has been modified since 1985. And then, of course, there's our charge, the task force charge, which really focuses, if we look at duties and responsibilities, it says make recommendations to the select board, suggest updates. You know what? I'm just going to see if I can mute anyone. Okay, I won't worry about that. Okay, to make recommendations to suggesting updates to the personnel bylaw and the future of the personnel board, which is very much a part of the bylaw. And what we'll see is that the bylaw itself is very central. If we get the bylaw recommendations where we think they should go, it'll become very obvious what we think the personnel board should do. It'll be very obvious to develop a new personnel charge. So by focusing on the bylaw, I think that kind of puts us in good shape.
And Claude, before we go any further, let me just ask how you would like to do this. Do you want to go through your slides and explain them first? Or do you want and wait for us to wait to ask questions later, or as you go?
I tell you what, this is kind of different than I would do in my day
If we're in
job.
person, yeah.
I think it might be better just because I'll be going. It won't take long. It'll take about 15 minutes or so. I'll go through everything. And then we could go back and take it because there is a certain flow and things kind of get answered as we go. So this looks in very broad terms at the topics of the personnel bylaw. And one of the things that kind of jumps out is that classification and compensation are the two issues that go to town meeting. And then something as important as policies and procedures, which is really the heart of personnel policies, doesn't go to town meeting. And that's, a historical anomaly. That's, just kind of the way it is. And then the other thing that comes out is when you actually read through the details of the bylaw, it doesn't reflect reality, nor does it reflect reality of the past 12 years as I know it, certainly not the 6 years I was on the personnel board. For example, in section 6 and 7, it says that the personnel board develops the compensation plan. Well, the personnel board does not have the resources or expertise or the time as a citizen committee to develop a compensation plan. It clearly is developed by the town manager and then is approved by the personnel board. So part of our exercise should probably include cleaning up the personnel bylaw to be more consistent with not only reality, but reality as we want it, which I would think would be, town manager. And by the way, by town manager, what is meant in the bylaw is that includes anybody who reports to the town manager, the HR director, and so on. So, that isn't meant to be a specific role for the town manager, it just means the town manager function. So the town manager function, being the HR director or otherwise, would develop the classification plan for discussion and approval, the compensation plan, and so on. So those are two issues. One, where town meeting comes in, and second, kind of, where the responsibilities are. Also making sure that the personnel board is mentioned. One of the interesting things in the bylaws, the quote at the top, all questions of doubt or dispute relative to interpretation shall be settled by the personnel board. So we're setting up, the bylaw sets up this sort of joint task between the town manager and the personnel board, which says, look, the personnel board is meant to be, the one who sort of decides if it's unclear. So the spirit of that, recognizes the importance of the personnel board. And then one other thing that comes up that isn't really exemplified here with details is that kind of from sections 8 to 20, there are some things that are very specific. And, those specific things may or may not be good ideas, because the problem with having a very specific thing in the bylaw is that if you then want to change it, you have to wait until town meeting to change it. So, I'm going to give you a terrible example that may or may not be true, but, let's say that everyone has to work a 40-hour week. That means if you want to hire somebody for a 38-hour week, you can't do it because it's in the bylaw that says 40 hours. So part of our work on this at a more detailed level should be to look at those things that we think should be in the bylaw because we think it preserves very important practices or very important rights, and things that maybe we think should come out. So in terms of the joint responsibility between the town manager and the personnel board, this is what I was just talking about in terms of initiating reports. So the ones that work fine, where it talks about a joint responsibility, sections 3, 10, and so on, we don't need to touch those. Others talk in a more specific way that says, look, the town manager initiates for personnel board approval. Those obviously work well as well, because that's the way it actually works in practice. But in those sections where it says, look, the personnel board initiates it and creates these reports, unless we want to hire a staff that duplicates the staff of the HR department, we really need to change those, because it's unrealistic for the personnel board to actually initiate those reports. They should be reviewing the reports and approving them. Now, what I'll say, just to be clear, these are all my opinions, but I've benefited from the discussions that we've had. And so many of you will hear things that you've said in this. So, this goes, anything you hate is mine, anything you like, so, we'll just take it that way. And this is one, for example, I'll give credit here to Paul McCone. Paul early on, when we were starting the task, was looking at getting reports. And reporting from both internal reports and external reports really seems to be at the center of a personnel board that functions very well. Now, this, again, is absolutely not meant as a criticism. The town manager's office through the HR director does an excellent job of reporting, but it seems like it's something worth putting into the personnel bylaw, that the personnel board is going to rely on internal and external reports. And the difference is, it seems like it might make sense to shift the personnel board away from, just the classification and compensation things, and move it more toward strategic and management reporting. Looking at if we are going to have a personnel board that is jointly responsible for the personnel department, the way it's written in the charge, that personnel board should get strategic and management reporting. What's going on with staffing, what's going on with turnover, what are we doing with consultants, what money is being spent, all of those things are a function of could be a function of a personnel board. And again, shout out where it goes. So here's another one that really comes from a lot of the meetings that we've had. There's concern that employees' concerns may certainly be heard, but we really feel, I'm getting a sense that the task force feels that there's a role for the personnel board beyond just the formal grievance process, yet not in grievances themselves, except where they're meant to be, by law, by statute, as they are now. And the reason for that, we've kind of heard from a number of different venues, which is, look, we're subject to open meeting law. it really is a minefield if somebody comes to personnel board saying, well, I really think my manager is doing a terrible job. It's like, we're not allowed for that to happen unless that manager is given a certain amount of notice and can choose to get representation. So it really is a minefield. So how do we do that? You know, what do we do? And so here are some thoughts about ways we can enhance the personnel board and also enhance employee communication. Have the bylaw state explicitly that any significant policy changes require a review by the personnel board. Now, that happens, but it would be good to state it explicitly. And this is not in there and should be in there or could be in there. Require that employees are notified of the personnel board meeting in which such changes are on the agenda. So if there's a new change in policy, you know, that's considered to be significant, employees are notified. The way the bylaw says right now, employees should be notified for review and comment. Well, that's great, but what exactly does that mean? This actually sets it out a little bit more explicitly. It says, look, you know, here's the change. Please, you know, feel free to comment, and here's when it's on the agenda, you know, should you want to attend the meeting and so on. Now, in the case where, let's say an employee thinks there's a significant change, but it isn't actually highlighted as a significant change, well, that's fine. Allow the employees to put it on the agenda of the personnel board themselves, to be able to say in some way, to say, look, you know, we would love it if the personnel board would discuss this policy change at a future meeting. So again, giving the employees access to the personnel board. Now, this is probably the biggest departure in a sense, but it's also something that already occurs absolutely in another sense. The idea that employees can be pointed to somebody that can make the two above things happen. And that would be somebody with a responsibility of a town employee ombuds. Now, that doesn't mean a new person to hire. This is, you know, an additional responsibility of someone else. And in fact, my guess is that Amy Foley, as HR director, already acts as, you know, probably a good percentage of her job is hearing exactly these sorts of things. And I'm also aware that under specific circumstances, for example, sexual harassment, there's not one but two people that an employee can go to, so that they have a choice of who to go to if they have an issue like that. And again, that's fairly common practice. So the suggestion here is to have, in fact, one or more, you know, and again, this is not a fully fleshed out concept. It's suggesting nothing more than the select board studies and considers adding responsibility of one or more employee ombuds to the positions of, for example, town human resources director, any other town employee, potentially a town committee member, though I'm not sure if that's a great idea or not. And for that appointment to require confirmation by the select board. And again, by highlighting it as a separate responsibility where somebody knows they can go to a person acting as the ombuds and say, look, in your role as ombuds, could you please take this up, perhaps number one with my department, and if there's no joy there, number two with the personnel board. And you know, that could be for a new issue, it could be for an existing issue, and it doesn't, of course, guarantee a positive resolution, but it does highlight that the personnel board cares, and there's a venue for citizens of Concord to hear about this. Next one, town meeting. So again, a little bit of a departure. So town meeting is voting up or down on what are actually very technical and detailed classification and compensation plans. To be clear, even though the compensation plan includes numbers and dollar signs, it doesn't actually change the town budget. The town manager's budget is what changes the spending of the town. The compensation plan is just how that money is paid. This only affects 20%. By my latest count, it's actually 20.6% of the town's full-time employees. And my understanding is having to wait for town meeting means that newer reclassified employees have to wait to have their positions confirmed. And I don't know that it's ever been an issue because they're normally voted on the consent calendar with no discussion. But I'm not sure we know what happens what if town meeting says, no, we're not agreeing to that? What happens if your role isn't there anymore because town meeting didn't vote on it? So, you know, those are issues to consider doesn't really make sense for town meeting to have to vote on that. We could, if we wanted to, and other towns do this, have the personnel board and the town manager agree the classification and compensation plans, obviously, by a vote of the personnel board, but instead focus on the personnel, the human resources department and the personnel board write reports. That might be a place to give more strategic and management reporting that's of more value to the town, rather than what are actually very dry and pro forma classification and compensation. I mean, as a citizen, I would much rather hear about things like turnover, about strategic things, about recruitment, and those are already in the human resources report. They could be more fleshed out perhaps in the personnel board report. I can't say I've read one in the past. Maybe it's there in the past few years, but I think it might be more interesting to consider focusing on strategic and management things rather than technical. So in summary, just sort of hitting highlights. The draft suggestions are, and again, these are just starting points for discussion and perhaps starting points to give us an idea of what questions we might want to ask. Clarify the division of responsibilities between the town manager and the personnel board. State explicitly that significant policy changes require review by the personnel board. Require employee notification of personnel board meetings where policy changes are on the agenda. Suggest a process where employees can ask for proposed policy changes to be put on the agenda if it wasn't done so already. Increase the communication of reports generated both internally and externally between town manager and the personnel board, focusing on strategic and management reporting. And then to study further and consider creating new responsibility of one or more employee ombuds to help address employee concerns and to facilitate communication with the personnel board. And then finally, to consider looking at the governance process between the town manager, personnel board, and town meeting, not just about those issues with classification and compensation, but also about those ones I mentioned at the outset, like in sections 8 through 20, where some of them are so specific, where we're tying the town's hands to change very specific things until town meeting, when we may not actually want to do that. And the goals of all this are really to clarify and, in fact, enhance the role of the personnel board to focus on larger issues, to clarify the role of town manager in the interaction with the personnel board, to change and clarify the role of town meeting, focusing on strategic and management issues rather than technical issues of classification and compensation, increase the access of town employees to the personnel board, and support town employees and increase their ability to access additional resources through better communication. And again, this is absolutely not to say it isn't happening, but it isn't necessarily memorialized in the personnel bylaw, which probably would send a very good signal to employees that it's something that we care deeply about. I hope that wasn't too long.
No, you did a good job. And what I would propose we do is we go back to the beginning and allow people to respond to it and just say, thank you for pulling a lot of different thoughts together that we have just sort of skirted around. And I think this really helps us to get a base agreement or disagreement around different parts of what we've been charged with. So thank you, Claude.
Oh, not at all. Okay, so this is the first page looking at the different legal documents, and the suggestion is to really focus on this one, because if we get this one where we want, it kind of helps us draft the personnel charge, and it seems to be very responsive of our charge, the task force charge.
Ruth, did you have something you want to say?
Yes, please. We don't have that in our packet. Claude, would
Oh,
you
I
do that?
Yeah, I can email this. I
Thank you.
added this at kind of the last moment because I thought, you know what, I'm not sure. And I can't say I was even aware, and I hate to admit this, but I can't say I was even aware of the personnel charge dating to 1985. I was certainly aware when I was on the personnel board. I was certainly aware of the personnel bylaw, but the personnel charge is so distant from the actual practice of the bylaw When I was on the personnel board, we never even referred to it.
It's
So
one of
I-
those
will you send it
documents.
out?
Sure, I'll email it out. However, do you want, well, I'll email it out with the minutes perhaps.
Sure.
That'd be
Okay.
fun.
Could
Could
I
we-
beg you to give it to me black and white?
Oh, sure, no problem.
Yeah, my
problem.
printer does not like blue.
Okay,
Yeah.
no problem. Sure. You know what I'll do? I'll include this and I'll print the whole, I'll send the whole PowerPoint with this slide in there too, in black and white.
Excellent.
That'd be
Thank you.
good.
Thank you.
Sure, sure. Okay, I'll go to the next slide. So again, this one really highlights the division of labor as it's shown in the bylaw, which is really, I would say, all of those are actually meant to be joint between the town manager and personnel board. And then the town meeting one is restricted to the two very technical 5 and 6. And also town meeting is required if we want to change anything that's actually specified, like the number of sick days and like the hours of work, which really, and this would be a discussion, it would be very helpful to sit down with the personnel board, HR director, town manager, and say, look, which of these make sense, which of these perhaps don't make sense to be
Yeah.
in the personnel bylaw. Okay, any
Yep.
questions on that?
Or
Ruth? Yeah.
comments?
My first question is what's the source of the quote at the top of the page?
Personnel bylaw.
And where, 2017?
Yeah, in 2017, I mean, I'd have to look at it. I have it on screen, but it's in there. I can send you the quote and page, but it's definitely in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep,
I just
sure.
was trying to
Yep.
keep everything parallel.
Yep.
And, sorry,
Okay, in order for me to see my whole screen, I could only see 4 people at a time. So if anybody wants to unmute to say something, or if Ann and Ruth, you can moderate, that would be great.
I can't unmute.
Oh, no. I mean, moderate. If you see somebody that has a question.
Yes, but
Okay, great.
I can't see any more than.
Oh,
what's
okay.
in- They would
So-
have to put something in the chat. And I
Okay.
don't
oh,
know,
good.
do we have a chat here? No, we don't.
Well, anyone should just feel free to talk up then and jump in. So this one says what I said earlier about the dual responsibility. This looks at really 3 sections that we really need to clean up to show that it's we could either talk about it as a joint responsibility, and that's fine, or we could write it the way that 5.1, 5.2 are written, that the town manager initiates for personnel board approval, either way. And we're very lucky to have perhaps the best legislative drafter in Massachusetts on our committee in Ruth Lauer. So if
Oh,
Ruth,
no.
if Ruth wouldn't mind helping when we ultimately get to that point where we need to draft carefully. You're quite legendary, your abilities there. Communication, okay. Yeah, again, this is what I call the Paul McCone, amendment. Really a good idea to highlight the importance of reporting that the personnel board can't really function. And again, this is absolutely not to say the personnel board doesn't get reports, because we're normally showered with reports. It's just not, it would be great for it to be mentioned in the bylaw to really highlight the importance of it. Internal reports, external reports, anything about budgeting, anything about pay, anything about healthcare, because the personnel board obviously benefits from having all of that.
Claude, can I ask a question?
Sure.
One of the things that got mentioned to me when I was doing some interviews was, the waiting for the town meeting to have all the classifications and stuff done.
Mhm.
Is there anything in the bylaws that says that the personnel board with the town manager couldn't set up a special town meeting?
Yeah, and I'm not yet, you need a legal person. I don't see why you couldn't have a special town meeting, but the question, I think we have to go back a step and say, do we think town meeting actually adds value on the classification and compensation plans? And if we look back historically, my guess is from any town meeting that I recall, it's gone through on the, what is it called? The consent calendar,
Consent.
Yep.
which essentially means it goes through without debate. Now,
Right.
you know, again, if we think it's important enough to go to town meeting, it seems like we would think it's important enough to debate at town meeting, but we certainly aren't inviting that and don't do it. I
Yeah.
think what I would rather see at town meeting is there are important issues in the personnel board or in HR that we think are important. The town hearing is where you could bring those up, and the town manager's report ultimately in the town budget would be where those questions could come up. And people from the personnel board, the HR director could obviously be there. You know,
Yeah.
in a way, we're distracting the town saying, look over here at classification and compensation, and then saying, you know, look, we're all done. Now, we obviously do have an HR report and a personnel board report, but by having classification and compensation there, we're elevating it where perhaps we, you know, shouldn't. And as you know, we obviously have to get legal counsel to say this is okay, and the bylaw has to be passed and changed, but there are towns that say, you know, the town manager proposes and the personnel board discusses and approves the classification and compensation plan. So,
Yeah.
So this is employee opinions. And again, you know, this is where I don't know that we need to know, and it's not that we don't care, well, we don't necessarily need to know the details of all the different potential things that employees are concerned about. But what's already come up loud and clear is that there seem to be issues that employees are obviously concerned about. And so, you know, does the personnel board have a role? And from what limited work I've done, it seems to be, and again, I thought Mary Accardi spoke to this, which is why I thought it was important. It does not seem to be that personnel boards are the place to air grievances. It seems to be a legal minefield if you allow somebody to start talking about their job and who they report to and their coworkers in an open meeting session, because, you know, that may not even be legal in the sense that if you're talking about somebody who isn't there, they're supposed to get 48 hours notice, but how do we know that they're going to talk about them? So, you know, very much to the same point that Kerry had in looking at our survey and us being careful, it does not seem like the personnel board should be a grievance committee. However, in a very considered way, figuring out a way for employees to bring something through an ombuds to the personnel board, that seems to be an interesting idea. You know, again, and to just sort of flesh it out a little bit, let's say you have an employee that has an issue, and it turns out to be an issue that's an important legal issue, a sexual harassment issue, that ombuds would be able to know where to send that employee, right? You know, and again, the ombuds being a town employee might be important for them to literally be a town employee so they can send them to the right place. But if it turns out to be a working condition and it's something that, you know, it might make sense that the employee and the rest of the department is concerned about, well, it's great for the ombuds to then pro forma say, okay, you know, as ombuds, I'll bring this up with the personnel board. And, you know, that would be a great place to air it, because the ombuds would be careful enough not to talk about people, not to talk about details, and so on. And again, in some cases, the ombuds might be able to go to the department and say, look, this working good issue seems to be an issue. I've heard from 3 people. Is that something you can fix? And maybe it gets fixed that way. But if it's maybe a budgetary issue and it needs to go to the personnel board, you know, that certainly could be a venue. And so those are these slides and the ombuds slides. You know, it's interesting because ombuds are second nature at universities. Universities are among the first groups to have ombuds, completely independent, you know, not part of HR departments. And, you know, they're just a very natural place to go, you know. And again, this is absolutely not to say that Amy doesn't spend a lot of time doing this, because I'm sure she does, but having it as a separately designated function and maybe with a couple of alternatives of where to go might be more responsive and perhaps well received by employees. Maybe, maybe not, but it seems like it might be something to think about.
So Claude, I have a question.
Yep.
Did you see any town with an ombudsman?
You know, it's interesting. No, I did not see a town with an ombudsman. There are towns with ombuds that are citizen facing. So, and there are lots of towns that have them, and even, you know, Concord does as well. It's not called an ombuds. I think it might be called a information officer or a citizen advocate or something like that. But there are some towns that have an ombuds function, but they're meant for citizens, so that a citizen can go to the townhouse and say, hi, I need to do this. And the
Yeah.
ombuds will be able to point them in the right direction. I think this is probably a function that's most naturally done by the head of HR, the way Amy Foley, you know, does it now. And I just wonder, you know, just like we have 2 people for sexual harassment, it might be interesting, or maybe not, but it might be interesting for there to be 2 people to go to give a choice, and for it to be very clear. And again, by putting it in the bylaw, it becomes very clear that you as an employee, if you have an issue, before you get to the point where it's a grievance, before it goes anywhere near that level, you just have a working condition issue. You have a process to be able to take it through an ombuds to your department head and through the ombuds to the personnel board. And that seems to be a reasonable thing. It's not a budgetary issue, because it would be an additional responsibility for somebody who is already an employee of the town.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments at this point?
I have one question, and that is,
Go ahead.
will we be able to discuss this further?
Oh, I should hope so, but I would like to hear people's questions first.
Well, what I'm trying to figure out is whether the PowerPoint reflects the amendments that Claude is proposing for the personnel bylaw language, the narrative, or is this separate from?
Okay, so what I sent across were originally 2 documents.
Yeah.
A draft of amendments to the bylaw, and then because the bylaw itself is hard to read, and same with the amendments, I thought I would highlight the gist of it. So these are meant to be a summary of the markup I did of the bylaw that basically includes these things. So you could obviously work from either document. We could work from this document and then change the markup, or we could work on the markup and not worry about this document.
Yeah, my thought was that the slides did a better job of putting a context around the bylaws. So I thought this was more important for us to review and either embrace or change or shorten or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we could obviously consider it a working document and reject what we want, amend what we want, and so on.
I have a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I just happen to think if we start delving into Claude's dissertation here, we're putting the cart well before the horse. That we're not to this place yet. My understanding of how we were going to approach this, and the chairs can correct me if I'm wrong, is in steps. We seem to have jumped, making a huge step here. I'm not making a comment about the actual slides. It's just that I'm perplexed as to why we're here, and we haven't even got to a point yet where we've finished our input.
I'm looking at this as an overview draft to be considered by somebody who's been on the planning board for 6 years.
Personnel.
Excuse me, did I say planning board? I keep doing that.
Okay, I just think we're
Personnel.
jumping. I just think we're jumping steps, and
Okay,
That's my,
Well,
Okay, Yeah.
no, I mean, I think that's fair. In a way, I don't see that there's anything wrong with going in parallel, because one of the things that this does, especially going up to, one of the early slides, is it really highlights some of the issues that we might want more information on. For example, sections 8 through 20, there are specific things that are in the personnel bylaw. Should they be there? Those might be questions that we could ask employees, ask stakeholders. And so I think this informs the questions. And I think so far what we've done since we started meeting for the past few months, I think that very much has informed this.
Yep. So, and does anybody have any other comments about the summary?
Well, I would offer that I greatly appreciate the work that Claude is doing. I believe what he is trying to do is show us what the personnel bylaw could look like, but this doesn't tell us what it does look like. And I need a transition point there. And I think the slides point out areas that we have to be talking about. It says, one of his slides says we don't need to work with A, B, and C. Amendments are not needed. And then I look through and I say, well, there's a whole section 4 that isn't there at all. So, there's still some work to be done. And it sounds like Claude is open to continue to work on it.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
good.
Absolutely. I mean, what I was looking for was really the high value things first, right? The sections 8 through 20, the individual issues, we need a lot more information on those. Again, from HR director, from the town manager, from the personnel board. And by saying certain ones are okay as is, all I mean was in the context of that responsibility sharing between the town manager and personnel board. So, this is just meant as a very limited starting point as to some of the issues that come up when we look at the personnel bylaw the way it is now. And if was that, I don't recall, and the document that I sent that was the markup of the actual personnel bylaw, did that get circulated to everyone or not?
Yes, it did.
It did. Okay.
It did originally, but I really felt like there was just too much
Oh, yeah.
information, and we needed to take it step by step.
Absolutely. But if anybody else obviously wants to have a look on it, the bylaws on the town website, that markup is just a starting point. Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. And then Susan.
Just a question for the chairs. Are we jumping to this point?
No.
If you are asking us to go over, I too have looked at the various sections of the bylaw. Didn't realize that we were going to be dissecting them or discussing them at this point. Is this a jump that you would like us to make? If we're going to start discussing these slides, then we've made a giant leap.
Well,
I'd like some time to go over it. This is not something I felt we were at yet.
I'm not asking for a vote.
No, not a vote. I'm asking, do you want, as chairs, do you want us to similarly jump to this point and start dissecting the individual parts of the personnel bylaw? Because that's where we're at. That's what we're doing right now.
I would like us to have it in the back of our minds as we move forward with the questionnaire and the survey.
Okay. Are we going to come back to discussing this?
Yes.
So we'll need to do some background work individually.
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
do this. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm asking of you, is that,
Okay.
are you asking us to do what Claude has done? And I'm not knocking what Claude has done. I'm just saying, I wasn't aware that we were jumping to this point before we've caught up. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
If that's what the direction of the chairs would like us to do. If not, I think we're still putting the cart before the horse.
Ruth?
I
I
thought,
think we should focus on getting the survey worked out, proceed with that, and then come to this.
Ruth?
and I would say a little bit of both. I think I can concur with both. I think that drilling down into the bylaw has always been on our horizon. We knew if we're making a recommendation to the select board, we knew we would have to become very familiar. And, but I also believe we have to be doing it in a parallel universe. We have to be studying the survey and pulling that together while we do the bylaw in the background. And at some time, we will push the survey to the background and focus more on
Bylaw changes.
the bylaw. But you see, for instance, this is one very handy dandy slide that Claude has shared with us about governance. It says section 12 through 20, leaves. Well, we were just counseled away from asking any questions about holidays, vacations, military. But if you look at it, it's in the bylaw. So we have to be comfortable with what I consider tension in the various ideas of what is in and what is out and what's both.
I don't disagree. I'm just asking if this, are we making a shift unbeknownst to me?
Well,
That we're going to start doing this. Just direct direction here, folks. That's all.
it's not a shift, as it is bringing another part of what we have to consider along with what we're in the midst of doing.
Well, I have no doubt, Ann, that we're going to be doing this. I mean, that's
Yeah.
our goal. That's our process. I mean, part of our process is to come up with, I assume, a written summation to present as a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. But are we going to start working on that now?
No,
Okay.
Let's go to work on the survey and get that.
Yep.
worked out.
and Susan had her hand up. Go ahead.
Right, thanks. I just wanted to remind people that at the end of the charge, to the appendices are the bylaw and the 1985, what we're calling a charge, but is really a description, is not a charge officially. And that they're kind of foundational documents that I think it would be good to be familiar with, because it helps frame the other things. Like, for instance, a
Which-
survey.
Do you want to list them, Susan? What are you referring to?
At the end of the charge, it says appendices. One is the bylaw,
Yeah.
the 2017, that's the latest version. And the other is the 1980, what's called the
Right.
1985 charge. And both of those are on the Personnel Board website.
Website, yeah.
Yep.
So it would be good if everybody had a working familiarity with them for your work.
That raises a question I would have, Susan, that is that 1985 document that I'm familiar with, was that ever rescinded? It appears to be in the process of things actually still a document that is in effect.
It's still a document, but it's not a charge. It was a
No, I
description.
understand that. But is it a
But
document?
yes, it's a document. It's an official document. It hasn't been rescinded. It hasn't even been acknowledged for many years. It's one of
Right,
those
okay.
lost in the shuffle kind of things.
Yeah.
But now it's resurfaced, so we need to think about it.
Any other comments?
I have a question about regarding moving on.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay, so maybe Claude could put away the PowerPoint for a minute so I can see
Yep,
shiny faces here.
okay.
Thank you. We have to mention if there's new business, we have to make room for public comment. And
Yep.
then we're talking about wrapping up next steps for our next meeting. And I just want to make sure that we don't go home before we talk about our next steps,
Okay.
please.
All right. Thank you. We've got the pending next meetings listed here. And this is the time for public comment or questions. And
Oop,
Uh-oh.
there's
Terry
Terry on her
after
way home.
it. Go ahead, Terry.
I've been listening the whole time and, you guys have a very difficult job. And I think this meeting, you're really starting to focus in on what you need to do. And I'm really seeing some progress. And I just want to thank everybody for hanging in there. And it's good that you have diverse points of view, but I think that outline from Claude is a really good start, and it should be done in parallel with the survey. So I'm just want to applaud your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. In terms of next steps, Ruth and I will sit down with Erin and do some merging of documents, questions, and bring them back to the next meeting. And what are some other actions that are on the table?
I'm wondering, are there any further stakeholder interviews out there? Because I'd like to I'd like to wrap that picture of our current, wrap it up so
Yeah.
that we know who we are and where we are. And Bruce and I have just touched base about the fire chief. Is there anybody else that remains outstanding, or do we need to go to every department head? What's the flavor of this?
Oh, I think we should talk to every department head. The other thing I would like to see is an organization chart of how this town works. I've never seen one.
I'm sorry, say that again, Bruce?
I said, I think we need to go to all department heads and go
Okay.
below them to get a sense of what's what. But that's just my personal opinion.
Which means we need to do it with common questions, as we have
Yes, we have.
in the past.
I mean,
So who are you saying you're going to speak with, Bruce?
I'm gonna go talk to the fire chief, and I've probably had 6 phone calls I haven't returned of people that have called me.
Okay.
So
Could
shall
you tell
we,
us
sorry,
6 phone calls to department heads?
No, just employees that have called,
from employees.
Oh, okay.
current and former.
So shall we do council on aging, human services, finance, planning? We still have a ways to go if we want to hit every one. How do we want to divide it if we're going to hit every one?
I can talk to finance.
Okay. I could do human services. How about rec? Is anybody in the market for recreation? Yeah, okay, I'll do rec. I honestly, I'm out of touch. I don't know who the director is. I'll have to do some homework.
Council on Aging, I'll do.
Okay. 141 Kais. That's all of planning.
Are we spreading this possibly a tad too slim?
Well,
I thought we were just directors. I mean, directors to me mean the people that are in SMT.
Well,
And I
we've
don't care.
done SMT. That's good.
Those are the directors of departments. They might have subdivisions that fall under them. But I don't know, whatever you guys want to do, but I thought we were just gonna hit directors.
I'm happy with that. I didn't want to offend anybody. I thought someone had expressed the need in an earlier meeting, someone amongst ourselves in an earlier meeting, that we should be talking more broadly. And if we are, it's time to share that. If we are not, let's say so. Is there an opinion? Paul is focus on SMT. Anybody else? Okay.
Who have we not hit on SMT? Fire Department, Bruce, he's gonna do that.
Yeah.
And what about, you just said you were going to go back to the police chief, right? So you gotta-
Laying right here on my desk.
Okay,
And I was gonna go back to Alan Cathcart,
yep,
which I can easily do. That's simple,
good,
just with some follow-up.
yep.
I'm just thinking we drill down on the directors.
Okay.
We should have a pretty good, and the obvious, personnel board. That's what this is all about. And just a thought. I don't care. We can spread out, but
Yes, Susan.
Yeah, I just had a question on the other, if you expand this to other departments, for the interviews you've already done, each task force member came up with a separate set of questions for that particular audience. Will that be the case? I mean, I guess my real question is, what do you hope to get by drilling down? What information are you looking for by drilling down with the SMT, if you want to keep following that trail?
Ruth?
We lost Bruce.
Right here.
I think it was something that was suggested by one of the members of the task force.
But what do you hope I mean, what's the deliverable, for lack of a better word? Information that I mean, I guess I'm saying that because I think what I really should say is I believe that looking at the bylaw and that those background documents should be done in parallel with whatever survey you're developing, and that it will inform what you might want to ask. But I'm still not getting the whole survey thing, but I know that I don't have to. That's not my job. I'm the liaison. So, but I think that you should keep a parallel track going with the bylaw.
We are.
Good, thank you. And I appreciate what the work that all of you have done, and
Yep.
particularly today, Claude.
And one thing I would like to say before we close out this meeting is we can communicate one-on-one with each other. And I would appreciate in the future if everyone would contact me and Ruth if you have questions before going outside the task force.
Good idea. I second that.
So, do I hear a motion? It's almost time for everybody to move on to the next meeting.
Don't forget, we have the caucus, very important, caucus this evening at the townhouse.
What time?
7:00. And this year they're allowing us to be inside. No more drive-in movies.
Ah,
That's no good.
but we should consider having an in-person meeting then.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's gonna be great.
Don't be surprised when you get the agenda, maybe the next week.
Okay, I would move to adjourn.
Second,
All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, good job.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Indeed. Thank you much. Thank you, Claude, very much.